Every time a mayor or a city official steps in front of a microphone, they repeat the same rehearsed line: economic growth, global exposure, and long-term benefits. They call it a rising tide that lifts all boats. But that number fails to answer the only question that actually matters: who is actually paying for it? Because if you zoom out, the timing is more than just uncomfortable, it's risky. As of early 2026, U.S. national debt is sitting at around $34 to $35 trillion. In 2025 alone, the federal government paid over $1 trillion in interest, not on infrastructure, not on healthcare, not on education, but simply to service existing debt. At the same time, economic growth has cooled into the low twos. Not a crisis, but not a boom either. In a higher debt, higher interest environment like this, the margin for error becomes much smaller. So the question becomes harder to ignore. Why are cities across the country taking on additional financial risk to host mega events like the FIFA World Cup 2026? From New York to Los Angeles to Dallas, the pitch sounds compelling. Millions of visitors, packed hotels, restaurants full, global attention, and to be fair, some of that is real. Major events can generate short-term spikes in tourism and local spending, especially in hospitality and service sector. But the structure behind those gains is where things get more complicated. Hosting is not free. Cities are responsible for security, transportation, logistics, and public infrastructure. Current estimates suggest costs can range from roughly $100 million to $200 million per host city, depending on scale and requirement. Multiply that across multiple cities, and the total public commitment quickly reaches into the hundreds of millions. Now compare that to where the largest revenue streams actually go. Global sponsorships, broadcasting rights, and licensing deals are controlled at the top, primarily by organizations like FIFA. Those deals are worth billions, but most of that revenue does not stay within local city budgets. In some cases, host agreements also include tax accommodations or exemptions for international organizations and partners, which can further limit how much revenue flows back into the local tax base. So you end up with an uneven structure. Public costs are local, but a large portion of the profits are centralized. Even the idea of a tourism boom deserves a closer look. Economists often talk about something called the crowding out effect, where regular visitors avoid a city during major events due to higher prices and congestion. Business travelers reschedule. Families postpone trips. Hotels raise prices sharply. So while you do get an influx of event-driven visitors, some of that spending simply replaces activity that would have happened anyway, rather than adding entirely new growth. And then there are the short-term infrastructure decisions. Cities may invest in upgrades that are necessary for the event, but not always for long-term use. Temporary modifications, specialized facilities, or accelerated projects can carry costs that don't fully translate into lasting economic value. To finance all of this, cities often rely on municipal bonds and mechanisms like tax increment financing. In simple terms, that means borrowing against future tax revenue, based on the expectation that today's investment will drive tomorrow's growth. Sometimes that works. But when projections fall short, the financial burden doesn't land on global organizations or sponsors. It stays local. It shows up quietly in delayed infrastructure projects, in tighter city budgets, in trade-offs that don't get labeled as World Cup costs, but exist because of them. Supporters will argue that the long-term exposure and global visibility justify the investment, and in some cases they may be right. But the historical record on mega events is mixed. Short-term economic boosts are common. Long-term financial benefits are far less consistent and often depend on how well costs are managed from the start. So this isn't really a question of whether the World Cup is good or bad. It's a question of structure, who captures the upside and who absorbs the risk. Because when you hear a number like $5 billion in economic impact, it sounds impressive. But impact is not the same as profit, and growth is not the same as return. So the next time you hear that your city is hosting something historic, ask a simpler question. Where does the money actually go and who is still responsible if the projections don't hold? Because behind every global event like the FIFA World Cup 2026, there is always a balance sheet. And whether you see it or not, someone is always on the hook.